I'm going to show you a couple examples of a turbo that's not repairable and give you justification of whether or not you should try and repair this turbo or not. This is an S300 that's made to fit and replace the HE351CW. This cartridge, I can get these usually on eBay. Mainly the cartridge is an S300 cartridge, but there's different turbines and compressor wheels on the S300s. I may have to machine the compressor housing and turbine housing to upgrade it to be able to fix this turbo. The only way that I'm able to get a cartridge to replace this is to get it used, and they're usually on tractor applications or something like that. This one, you can see the turbine completely fell off. When a turbo looks like that, usually the bearing housing is completely bad. Well, the whole center cartridge is bad. The turbine and everything from the turbine wheel, the compressor wheel needs to be replaced. In this case, I may be able to fix this turbo, but I really have to see what's out there. It's dependent on if I can get a bigger turbine shaft and machine this turbine housing to accept it, or if this is not wore out bad enough to where it still can accept another replacement turbine. The compressor wheel also needs to be replaced just because where the shaft broke. When this happens, a lot of times the compressor housing needs to be machined out to accept the bigger compressor wheel too. This one, I might be able to repair it like I was saying. So you don't really always total out one of these. It really depends on how much they paid for that turbo and how much I can fix it for, and whether I can save them money from buying a new turbo or not. Here's a 6.0 Power Stroke turbo. It's got a lot of shaft play. Sometimes if they have that much play, they're rebuildable still. But the point when it does need to be replaced is when the bearing housing cannot be used. You could check that by putting the rear seal in the turbine and the bearing housing to check it to make sure it still collapses. In this case, the shaft has broken in this turbo too. And when the bearing housing goes bad, you may as well just buy another turbo, because getting this replacement bearing housing, the cheapest I could find is $200, and it's still not a genuine part. So in that case, you may as well just buy another turbo, because you could usually get them cheaper for $200, for less than $200 to replace the turbo for a used one. What's happened here is the shaft has just completely fell off. What happens when the turbine falls apart is usually the posts that are in this that hold the vanes, usually they break off. At that point, it's really not worth the time to repair, because the bearing housing is probably bad and the turbine housing may be scarred up to where it can't be used. It's a possibility that the turbine housing could still be salvaged, because we do have the replacement pegs to be able to replace those. But in some cases, you got to determine, is it really worth my time, because the rest of the turbo is not fixable anyway. So I'd be left with just an exhaust housing and still need to buy a whole nother turbo to try and fix this turbo, in which the other turbo would probably come with another exhaust housing anyway. A lot of times these get rotted out really bad too. At the point when I decide not to use the turbine housing is if they're rotted out really bad in this area. Mainly this step where the manifold sits on here to be able to seal. On the exhaust, the outlet side, we can machine all that down to bring it back so it will seal again. These are the posts that I'm talking about in the 6.0 turbine housing. When the turbine shaft goes bad, it's very common that the wheel will hit the vanes and bust the posts off. Those can be drilled and replaced, and I do have those replacement parts. But there's a lot of time involved in doing that. Plus, since the bearing housing is bad anyway, you're usually just going to have to buy another turbine housing. This one I machined for the 2003 turbine, so I'll show you what that looks like. this I machined down so that it'll fit and seal against the downpipe again. This all gets machined out, straightened out, and then flared up at the bottom there, or the back side there. That really helps pick up the flow from doing that, but also it helps cut a lot of the rust out of it, so it looks like a new housing all over again, and it's bigger, so it'll flow more than it did before. You guys have been a great support on the channel. It's been able to help me buy the things that I really need. I am going to need to buy new shoes soon. The floorboards have just gone out of these. I've glued these back so many times, but I don't know, like at this point I think I need to replace these because it gets to the point where my sock will get glued down to the floorboard of the shoe. So with all your support, you will be able to help me buy a new pair of shoes. And I appreciate that from the bottom of my heart.